All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Form Check Friday. Now, you know what it is. You know what we do here. We take a look at lifter's technique, like George here. George is doing some bench press behind me. Before we get to George real quick, I just want to thank everybody for asking some really insightful questions in their submissions lately. It's been really great to have sort of some larger scale topics to talk about in the videos and some more interesting questions. We've got a few more that we're going to touch on today because some of our submissions have some more interesting questions attached in there. So thank you for submitting good questions. If you're interested in being selected or submitting your videos, go ahead and check in the description box below. Now, George, this is his third set of 4 at an 8 RPE. He's doing 2 count pause bench on the week 6 of the 16-week CBB program, which you can find at calgarybarbell.programs.app. He says he moved his grip a little bit wider and found that he had less elbow pressure and pain. So he's mostly thinking about and concerned about his grip and his wrist and elbow positioning and those kinds of things. So we're going to take a look at that really quick. Now, the first thing I'm noticing here is he's really straight through grip. We've talked about this a few times, I think, on Form Check Friday, but generally I advise allowing the wrist to cock back a little bit. Now, the issue with trying to be very straight through in the grip is obviously we want to try to keep the bar stacked above the wrist and above the elbow, so we have this nice sort of line as we push through the bar. Now, if at any point that bar moves this way, which it is prone to do when we're trying to be super straight through with the wrist, then that can really throw off our bar path and disrupt our bench overall. So what I recommend people do is allow that wrist to cock back a little bit and just make sure that bar is low in the palm. So this is part of my hand right here. I got a callus there because that's where I bench, that's where I press into the bar, and that's where I recommend you press into the bar as well. So allow your wrists to cock back a little bit, just make sure that bar is relatively low in the hand, low in the palm. Now, the other thing I'm noticing here is you got a pretty heavy touch. I think we could maintain a little bit more tightness during that 2 count pause. So the idea of the 2 count pause is it is an exaggerated isometric contraction. So what we want is we want for you to be in control. We want for you to be producing force against the bar in that pause. We don't want it to be a relaxing into the chest. And you can see, especially on this rep, we come down, the bar touches, and then there's even a extra little bit of sinking into your chest during the pause, right? So we are actually relaxing into the bottom. I want you to continue to drive your chest up, continue to keep that upper back tight, and continue to hold that position very actively during that pause, right? Keep the weight of the bar in your hands, not on your chest. Other than that, I think your bar path looks good, and I'm glad to hear that all of my harping on people about widening the grip had some positive impact on you, because I think, you know what, honestly, more often than not, it does. More often than not, widening the grip, it helps, okay? Our next video here comes from Isabel. She's doing a top double at 120 kilos. She's been lifting for a year and a half, but she's in the UK. She said she has to go through a couple of rounds of lockdown. That's really kind of disrupted her training and made things difficult. Now she says that her deadlift is weak compared to squat and bench press. Now there was obviously some wording I want to change in there. Stop thinking of your lifts as weak. It's very important that we don't frame things in this way. You can very much sabotage yourself by saying X lift is weak or my poverty bench or these kinds of things, because then you go in, you expect to do poorly. You expect to not perform well. Where if you can flip that and try to frame it as, damn, I really love to deadlift. My deadlift's really picking up speed, and say those kinds of things to the point where you believe them. And one of the steps from getting from saying it to believing it is setting up your training in such a way that you can have successes that allow you to buy into that way of thinking about things. But I digress. Be careful with how we frame these things and how we talk to ourselves about our lifts. We've touched on that before. So Isabel says that above 85%, she kind of starts pulling with her back instead of pushing off the floor. And we can see just a little bit of drift here. So one of the things I think you're doing, Isabel, is I think you're setting your hips just a tad too low. And I think that if you focused on keeping your hips back a little more instead of quite so low, I think that would help you off the floor with this little bit of transition where, you know, the first thing that happens is the hips rise up and everything kind of drifts back. I think if you set your hips back a little bit and have a little bit more of a vertical shin angle off the floor, you're probably going to see a more consistent sort of straight up and down bar path when you're starting the lift. Now the next thing that happens is, let's watch this second rep here. So when we start, we're very much on the toes, right? Our weight is kind of forward over the bar, and I think it's because you're trying to be very upright. Now you mentioned that you know, you might be a little bit out of practice with lockdowns and stuff like that, and I think it's really important to go in and like feel this stuff out. Take your time getting back to loads that you were using before you were, you know, on your break from the gym. And yeah, I think the biggest thing here is shifting kind of everything back a little bit, right? Even if that means your hips are a little higher, you've got a really great, really sound back angle here. You're able to maintain it throughout the lift. Like, your deadlift is solid. It's just from here to here, you know, breaking that bar off the floor in this part of the range of motion, we see a lot of the hips coming up. We see a lot of things kind of shifting back. And what I would say is that you would want to sort of preemptively shift back, pivot that weight back onto your heels a little bit more, allow your hips to rise, and just try to keep yourself back so your shins are, again, a little more straight up and down, and you're gonna be a little smoother off the floor. This to me looks really solid though. Overall, I think really solid pulls, and best of luck with getting everything back on track. Just as a quick aside, we did just release the COVID comeback program on calgarybarbell.programs.app. If you're looking for a program that'll take you from a decent sized layoff in the gym to getting back to your strength levels, go ahead and head over there to check it out. But excuse me. All right, now Skyler is number 3 here, digging the Led Zeppelin shirt. He says he was powerlifting for about 2 years, but a back injury put him out for a while. So he's a little bit worried that his knees shift inwards out of the bottom of his squat, and wondering, you know, is that a bad thing? Do I have any tips to fix that? And he says that he does want to compete down the road, and this is 405 for a triple. So the biggest thing I'm noticing here, I think you got a really good squat. I think kind of everything's moving well. You have, you know, pretty good flexibility and timing, all that kind of stuff. I think your depth is maybe a little on the line, so I would work on getting maybe a tiny little bit deeper here. The other thing is that knee shift is so subtle, right? It's so subtle. We're looking at just a couple of degrees there. So what I would do is I would probably just bring your stance in just a tiny bit, maybe even just angle the toes a tiny bit more straight forward instead of outwards, and that might take care of your problem right then and there. And if it doesn't, I probably wouldn't worry about this amount of knee movement, right? I don't think that you're losing a lot of positioning. I don't think you're losing a lot of power. You know, I think that perhaps there's a bit of a lapse in bracing tightness in the bottom, and this can coincide with that sort of knee crash a lot of the times. Is if we, you know, if our bracing shifts or we get loose for a second, sometimes the hips will move around to try to, you know, compensate or whatever, to try to, you know, regain some tightness before the concentric phase of the movement. So when we're going into the bottom, you can see there is this shift of like, okay, we're very chest up, very trying to stay tall on the way down, and then on the way back up, we definitely see, you know, the ribs kind of clamp down a little bit more on top of the abs. We get a little bit more leaned forward. So I'm gonna make it 2 things that I'm gonna recommend. Number 1, either bring your stance in or your toes in a little bit. And number 2, try to brace a little bit more ribs down and allow yourself to lean forward in the squat instead of trying to be so upright, because we are seeing a shift from this upright position to a little bit more of a leaned forward position. Now, the leaned forward position is not a bad thing. A lot of people are much stronger there, and I think that if that's the case for you, you should take advantage of that instead of trying to force yourself to be very upright. I think a common sort of trap that people fall into is they see a lifter on Instagram who's maybe not, you know, shaped like them, maybe doesn't have the same leverages or limb lengths as them, and they try to emulate that. And I don't think that means that you're an idiot or you're messing it up, whatever. But it is something that's easy to do. So make sure that, you know, if you're gonna model your squat after somebody, that it makes sense, that you have similar mechanics, that you have similar body weight or limb lengths or leverages and those kinds of things. It's good to think about those kinds of things when you're trying to, you know, adapt cues from watching somebody else squat, right? All right, up next is Raz. Razzle dazzle, my man. All right, so he says he's 62 kilos body weight. This is a comp bench press of 82% for a triple. Also on the CBB 16-week program, accessible at calgarybarbell.programs.app if you want it. Now he lists actually a number of issues here and things that he struggles with in his bench, and we're going to pause for a second so we can take a look at that. Now he says one of the things is that he struggles to get his feet totally flat. Now it looks to me like we just have two different flooring here, right? We have a partition in the flooring where, yes, it's going to be hard to get your heel down because you're up an extra millimeter from this foam flooring. So that might just be something that's like, you might not be able to do much about that unless you can get rid of this flooring. If this is a home gym and you can get rid of this flooring, it doesn't look like a home gym, but then that's probably going to solve your problem right there. The other thing is drive your knees out a little bit, because it looks like your feet are kind of inverted, right? We're in on the insides of the feet. And I think that if you can just drive your knees out, that's going to help you flatten your feet and get the rest of your foot a little bit flatter. Now, honestly, I don't know that this is like, oh, his feet are up, he's not going to get the start command. But, you know, I hate to say that, and then you run into a super picky judge who really wants to make an example out of you and doesn't give you the start command, because I've seen that happen. It's not pretty. So the other thing he mentions is leg drive. You know, he feels like he's getting leg drive on some reps and not on others. It feels inconsistent. And lastly, he says he's not going too wide with his grip because he says it feels uncomfortable to go too wide, which is totally valid. You know, I joke a lot about people needing to bench press wide. This looks fine. If this is a comfortable range of motion or length of range of motion for you, then I would say roll with it. You don't need to go wider. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. All right. Similar thing with the wrists. I think we're trying to be very straight through like this, and I think we can afford to let those wrists cock back a little bit, keep that bar low in the palm. Now with leg drive, the sort of beginning or the core of how I coach leg drive is that we're trying to apply pressure through the feet, which will help enhance our arch consistently throughout the set. So a lot of people, when they think about leg drive, they think about this like jolt that kind of blasts the bar or gets the bar started off the chest. And I think in a lot of cases, especially when newer lifters try to utilize something like that, it can be problematic because it causes either their butt to come up, or it causes the bar to be really kind of, it goes in a bunch of different directions, inconsistent off the chest, right? And we want to try to avoid anything that's going to cause inconsistency. So it looks to me like during the pause, you're relaxing the bar into your chest, like we were talking about with George, right? You come down and your pause actually rests on your chest. We see the chest drop a little bit during the pause. Don't do that, my man. Raz, keep that chest up, drive that chest up into the bar. Make that touch light on the t-shirt. Light touch your t-shirt, not your chest. And make sure that's an isometric contraction. We want to be active in the bottom position. We don't want to be resting in the bottom position, because then it's really hard to get back into a sort of, you know, a position where we can produce a lot of force. On the way down in your bench press, think like you're winding up a spring. Don't think you're coming down. Like I think one of the ways that it helps to sort of conceptualize this is thinking about like winding a spring. You want to think about getting tighter as you come down, not like this is one part of the movement, rest, and then this is the other part of the movement. But imagine like drawing yourself up to produce the tightest, most powerful position you can possibly create when that bar's on your chest, so that when you press, this is as tight as possible. The legs are contributing maximally from the moment you unrack the bar to the moment you re-rack the bar. And then I think we're going to see a little bit more consistent touch, consistent leg drive. Looks like we're losing a little bit of tension in the shoulders during the pause. So yeah, there's a few things to work on there, but I think overall you got some really good sort of base habits. Again, good timing, a lot of those, you know, kinds of things. I think things are looking pretty good overall. All right, now this next video comes from Chelsea. You can see she's chosen to remain anonymous, which I totally respect. If anybody wants to do this, to send something in because they're in the slightest bit uncomfortable about being watched by however many thousand people watch these videos, 100%, this is totally fine, and I probably don't even need to tell you that, because it should just be assumed that your privacy is your privacy. All right, now Chelsea is a 57 kilo lifter. She said she's using the GZCL program, which is a popular Reddit program that I don't know a whole lot about, but I've heard it's pretty popular. 87.5 kilo deadlift here. She says she uses a 15 kilo bar because her hands are really small and she has no plans to compete. So again, that's totally fine. I'm not here to necessarily talk everybody into competing, just here to help people lift weights better. So she's wondering if her back is rounding too much. She says she doesn't get any pain. She just feels a lot of pressure in her legs, which is a good sign. She's wondering if she should upgrade her belt. She's using a Velcro chic belt right now. And she says she needs to point her toes out slightly to get into a good position, and is wondering maybe that means she should try sumo. So let's take a look at the pull. Number one, I think I think we could lower the hips a little bit. Looks like we're really trying to get a lot of extension here, and we might be kind of overdoing that extended cue. So I think personally, if you drop your hips down a little bit, let your knees forward, and try to like clamp those ribs down on top of the abs, right? So if we flatten this out a little bit instead of being quite so extended, I think we're gonna find a cleaner brace or a more consistent brace, and we're gonna get a lot better sort of scapular depression, a lot better feeling out of the lats, kind of pulling down into the hips, right? So watch what happens when you start to pull from here. Is everything just kind of comes out this way, right? We start to see the position of your back break down a little bit, and the hips are staying really high, and we end up with kind of a stiff-legged deadlift position. So what I would say is that we should lower the hips a little bit, and let's see if we get into maybe a bit better position in the subsequent reps. They look pretty similar actually throughout the set. So this just looks to me like a really stiff-legged deadlift. I think we're doing a really good job on this rep. You can see that big movement in the shoulder blades, right? Right there. This is great. That is something we very much want. But I do think, again, you can get your hips a little lower, even if that means your knees come forward, and then be patient off the floor, right? Think about locking all of this in, right? Lock your trunk in and then push the floor away. Because I do think we're getting into the point where we're seeing the hips rise up and we're ending up in this sort of stiff-legged, like very pull position, which not a bad thing, but maybe a little bit less efficient than getting your hips down and using your quads a little bit more. Now, to answer the rest of your questions, is your back rounding too much? No, I absolutely don't think so. I have clients who pull with much more rounded backs than this, and they are all fine and progressing and pain-free. You know, rounding your back in the deadlift does not mean you're going to hurt yourself or cause pain. It just doesn't. That being said, I think if you get your hips a little lower and you get your trunk a little bit more vertical to start with, I bet we'll see a little less rounding, which in the sort of on the efficiency spectrum, we'll see maybe a little bit more efficient lockout when we get to the end of this set. You can see this lockout's just a little bit slow, a little bit tough because we lost a little bit of position. See how the bar slows down there, getting that last few degrees of extension out of the low back. So, should you upgrade your belt? I mean, if you are interested in pursuing strength training for a long period of time, you're probably going to get more benefit out of using a stiff or stiffer leather belt. You know, if you can get a hold of something cheap, like a 10 millimeter cheap belt, that's probably a decent way to go. I'm obviously going to recommend the SBD belt. It's great, but it's also very expensive, and yeah, it's very thick and perhaps unwieldy for a person's first belt, but very high quality, and you'll never need to buy another belt. Now in regards to pointing the toes out slightly to get into a good position, should you sumo? I would say absolutely give it a shot, right? I think anybody who's relatively new to lifting, who hasn't done sumo before, is doing themselves a disservice to not try it out. You might find that you get into a sumo position and all of a sudden, like the deadlifting third eye just opens and you're like, oh my God, I get this. And you just like take off with progress. You might find that you try to do sumo and you're like, oh my God, what the hell is this? I can't stand it. It feels so awkward and terrible. Either way, I think it's very much worth the experiment, worth checking out. I see a lot of lifters who are conventional deadlifters who try sumo and learn some more about their own positioning, about their own, you know, kinesthetic awareness or proprioception, basically how their body moves in space, what different positions feel like, that they're able to bring back to their conventional, which I think is very useful. And In terms of how much, sorry, she also mentioned that she started lifting in her 40s and would love to try to get a 2 times body weight deadlift. Is there any way to sort of, you know, estimate how much progress she can expect? And I would say the sky's the limit. There are plenty of studies done on aging populations and well beyond 40, that's for sure, gaining a lot of strength with resistance training. And a lot of the benefits too of maintaining strength and independence into like later life. We're talking like 80s and 90s. Very, very beneficial stuff. So I would say even if you can't get a 2 times body weight deadlift, maybe you get a 1.9 or 1.8 times body weight deadlift. I don't think 2 times is unrealistic, by the way. But you are going to get all of the benefits of strength training, you know, both psychologically and physically. So absolutely, you know, the sky's the limit. You know, you get what you put into it in a lot of ways. So definitely don't be discouraged because you picked it up later in life. You know, I didn't start lifting until I was an open lifter, so 24, and I did pretty well. I've done pretty well for myself. So yeah, it just takes time and practice. Anyways, Chelsea, thanks for sending that in. I think you asked some great questions, and I wish you all the best with your strength training journey. All right. This next lift is from Andy. So Andy says that Andy's always had poor flexibility and kind of issues with that since he was a younger guy. He says he wants to get into powerlifting but just feels super weak, right? So he says he gets discouraged by being weak. Again, we got to watch this self-talk, right? And then just ends up trying to focus on technique instead of adding weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this one for our community, because I think a lot of our community have maybe been here and been at a place where you feel, you know, the sort of crushing weight of all of these social comparisons. You go on Instagram and watch way too many people lift way too much weight and feel poorly about yourself. And I'm hoping that everybody will go down into this comment section and offer some words of wisdom and some words of encouragement for Andy here. I'm going to chime in next week because I have a lot I want to say about this, but I'm going to open this up to our wonderful and fantastic community. So go ahead and down into the comments below, leave a message for Andy and let him know that he's not weak, he's just getting started. And yeah, anyways, I'm not gonna I'm gonna save all of my rant or whatever for next week. So please go ahead and leave some words of encouragement for Andy. And we will see everybody in the next form check next week. Check out our programs on calgarybarbell.programs.app and our coaching at calgarybarbell.com. New apparel coming soon. We'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye.